Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us this morning about this topic. I just have one technical question, if I might, for the team about getting my slides to display. Got it, and hang on a minute here. We'll just get that going.
Oh yeah.
Now do you see a blank screen, everybody?
We're seeing the ANOVA.
The universe, right?
I see the
Okay.
universe.
Give me
Thanks,
1 second
Laura.
here, and we'll get that going. Thanks everybody for your patience.
Great.
Okay, is everything looking good on the video end here?
Looks great.
Great. Okay, well thank you again everybody for joining us this morning for this discussion, technical and workplace writing in a digital age. It's an interesting topic, especially after this week's election, with everybody doing so much writing and email and Facebook, and actually there's a lot of studies, including one from the Pew Internet Internet and American Life project, that make it pretty clear that today's students, people in that age group, are actually writing more than they ever have before, but they're writing in settings that we might not associate with typical workplace writing or professional writing setting. Although the kind of writing they're doing in Facebook and Twitter and email and so forth actually is being used more and more in the workplace. So part of today's discussion is to try to talk about how to take our rhetorically sound principles of audience and purpose, and maybe work with the audience and purpose worksheet in a couple of the books to engage students about that kind of writing, and see what we can learn from them also, which has been a good technique for me. That's the interesting thing about being a college professor, is we get older and the students stay the same age, so we have a lot of opportunity to continue to learn from the new generations of students that are coming in with a whole bunch of different kinds of ideas and practices about communicating in an age where they've been raised with this technology. So let me just change slides here. Okay, so everybody remembers all the predictions about the paperless society. Seems kind of funny now. I'm just looking around at my own desk. I have piles of paper everywhere. I probably have less paper than I used to, and I think I'm seeing that with undergraduate students as well, with papers submitted in Word and giving them comments with track changes features and things like that. But still, there's a lot of paper, and I think it's pretty fair to say that in workplace settings, most documents exist in both paper and digital formats. And PDF actually is a good example of a technology that retains the formatting of a hard copy document and yet allows the document to be circulated widely. Of course, some documents are completely web-based. So for example, if you go to like the Mayo Clinic website to look up some information about a medical condition or a drug, that would be a completely web-based piece of information. But often there are just multiple versions of documents. That seems to be really the way that a lot of documents are constructed now. So there's a hard copy version, and then there might be various online versions. There could be a web-based version. There could be a small summary of it posted to Twitter and so forth. And then there are these kind of new types of what we might call documents, or some people might call genres, or communication types. Email being the most obvious one, although it's not that new anymore, and most of you know students think about email as kind of their parents' generation technology, but it is the most widely used form of communication in the workplace, and probably at school too. I think most of us know that students will email you rather than come by your office hours, or at least that seems to be the trend. Other new types of information, Twitter, Facebook, obviously, blogs, which have been around for a while, but still a kind of relatively new format. And then these customer review sites, which have been kind of interesting to me lately to see how people write on those, but more interestingly in terms of workplace communication, how do the people who work at those companies respond particularly to like a negative review in a site like Yelp or TripAdvisor or something, and I've been seeing some interesting examples of that. So of course audience and purpose are the two big questions for any type of technical communication. These are the two big questions where we try to engage students in the rhetorical nature of all communication. And you know, typically we will ask students, who is your primary audience? Who is this document or communication intended for primarily? Who might be some secondary audience members? And then, you know, we kind of go from there and ask, what do they know? What do they care about? What do they understand? What level of technicality is appropriate? And what kind of document might be appropriate? We also ask about purpose. What's the primary purpose of the document? And typically we would ask, is it mainly to inform? Is it mainly to persuade? Obviously all communication has multiple levels of purpose, but there's usually some kind of a primary purpose. I think the Mayo Clinic example I offered a minute ago would be an informative communication type where people need information. It's not task-oriented necessarily. So the main thing that I think is important with all these new writing practices and new writing formats or forms moving about and changing really quickly is just that these key rhetorical principles always apply. And in one of the books we actually talk about templates, like the kind of templates that come with Microsoft Word and other word processing documents, and how those templates are nice. They're nice to have, but you know, you should really you still need to consider audience and purpose first before you just let the computer start formatting things for you. So when we talk about digital documents, a big piece of this kind of these new formats is the delivery, and there's some interesting features about digital delivery that are worth considering, and I think make for nice discussion points in class as you get to an assignment where you might be working on the report or proposal, that kind of final project that's due, and you can talk about the relationship of that, the hard copy version, and then what happens if it goes into a digital format or summaries are sent out via email or Twitter or something. And the first interesting thing that I don't think students actually really think about all that much, because it's so natural for them. It's just been part of their landscape, their whole lives is this notion of speed, which is that obviously documents, messages, packets of information travel really quickly, and you know, obviously in some cases instantly or almost instantly, like a chat of some sort. And that's something interesting to consider when, and I'll mention this in a minute, but if the audience is mainly supposed to be an internal audience and it's something sent via email and somebody decides to post that somewhere. So these make for some interesting discussion points about how to anticipate audience and purpose. And I've got some examples of that coming up toward the end. The next interesting variable in all this, of course, is reach, and that, you know, one click of the mouse button, click enter or send, and the document or information can reach hundreds or thousands of people, and then even then people can then forward and retweet. And that can just continue to really increase what we would call the readership or the audience participation with that document. Probably, and again, it's the kind of unanticipated situation that I think provides some fun opportunities to talk to students about specific cases and how they might anticipate for that. Last but not least, of course, is the notion of authorship, and how you can really know who authored the document or where it comes from, and how people assess the credibility or how people trust what they receive based on what kind of factors. There's a couple of studies now that have shown that the the primary way that people assess whether a web-based document is credible or not is the way it looks. And that's a really interesting discussion about design and how powerful the look and feel and design of a document is, particularly online, when people may not always know whether you're a dog or not. So, and this cartoon's from Peter Steiner, and you've seen it a lot. We're just using it here to make that point. So what does all of this mean for audience and purpose? Well, as I think I used the word unpredictable a minute ago, but audiences, it's unpredictable in some way unless something is really tightly controlled on an intranet, and even then we can think about WikiLeaks and situations where information has leaked out. But we all often talk about primary and secondary audiences, but there's kind of this other category now, unpredictable or unanticipated, and how can we maybe do a better job anticipating that. I think this is easiest to teach in the context of a case study in technical communication. 12E, we've got the consider this boxes. There are places where you can engage students in some kind of real-world examples that that can give you an opportunity then to say, you know, could we have done a better job thinking about those other readers of the document. And similarly with the purpose of the document, what's the primary purpose, what other purposes may it be put to, and then what can we think about in advance as unanticipated. So kind of 3 examples just to get us thinking a little bit. The most obvious one that I think is pretty easy to talk about in class, you can find a lot of examples of this online. We've got some pointers to this in a couple of the books too. Is just that famous email message that somebody sends at 5 p.m. on Friday that they're a little disgruntled about what's going on at work, and they send it to their coworker, and on Monday morning it ends up with the company vice president and up on a slideshow for the whole organization or something like that. So that's always an interesting one to talk about. And the one audience, the person you thought was going to read it, it really went well beyond that. Facebook postings are a really interesting opportunity to talk to students about audience, and we could probably just talk about that here all day. But with undergraduates in particular, the idea that you're trying to persuade your friend about some particular topic, or you're talking about something you did on the weekend, or all these examples now that are pretty common and easy to find online. And it suddenly gets whatever you posted ends up being mentioned at your first job interview. So this is kind of anticipating audiences that you may not have thought of initially. So that's another interesting one. And then I think I talked about this a minute ago, but just you have a PDF version of a report, mainly intended for internal audiences, and may find its way on the internet. And some other examples are sort of less about things leaking in a way than just about situations where, because you can make the document available in an online setting, you actually want it to be set up for multiple audiences. So that becomes interesting too, then, a conversation about how you might have certain parts of the document that are written for more technical people and certain parts that are written for a non-technical audience. And I think you see that kind of layering on purely web-based documents, where it'll say click here if you're a physician, or click here if you're the patient. And then you can have a good discussion about word choice and technicality of the language, and whether to provide a glossary and those kind of things. So audience and purpose generally has been an opportunity to articulate those points about who will be reading the document and what the document is meant for. And then from that, students would make a series of rhetorical choices appropriate for that situation. One choice being, what's the right type of document for the situation we have here. How formal or informal should it be? How technical can it be? What's my primary goal? Is it to persuade or inform? How long should this be? And then finally, how should we deliver it? And in some ways, the delivery medium, which is related to document type, actually tends to drive some of those other decisions in some ways, particularly length. Another interesting discussion point is just that you may pick one document type, but you may want to have other layers to it, like a Twitter feed or something like that. So the audience and purpose profile in strategies as well as technical communication 12E, we think about primary audiences and secondary audiences, as we talked about before. But then it would be fun to take that form and work with students about, if digital delivery will be involved, who are some other potential readers we might think about for this document? Is it internal, but could it also be potentially used, or on purpose or not, externally? Is it just going to be local, or does it have more of a global readership? And just what are some other unanticipated situations we might think about? What are the technical backgrounds of these readers? Could we layer the information, or you do something modular so that people can access the information that they need? And then it's just always interesting to ask the students to consider other variables. I find, with working students, they have a lot of good examples from being on the job, and with students who've had internships, they have something interesting to say about that. So now we have sorry, my slide didn't change, I think. Yeah. Or maybe that slide's the same as the other one. Yeah, so getting then to the question of unanticipated uses, are there potentials where you might want to think about places where the material might be, people might cut and paste it, and that's a really interesting thing to talk about too. If someone takes a particular paragraph that is describing a technical procedure and uses it somewhere else. I mean, you can't necessarily control for all these things, but you can certainly talk about that and any other kind of persuasive purposes that you might be able to think about. So I want to talk for a minute then about the audience and purpose worksheet and how you might take that and then modify it for the particular assignment. I think in the books, it's considered to be a basis, and then you would modify that. You would use it based on the assignment, but it might be fun to have your students, think a little more about the situation, the context, and then to add some sections about digital documents and digital delivery. So here, this is from Strategies, the 12th edition, or excuse me, from Technical Communication 12th edition. Here under the length and detail that belongs in the document, the format, the medium, and then from that you can think a little bit about the tone and loop back and think about the technical background or whether if it's going to be distributed online, there's a broader cultural context. So those are some of the things you can consider, tone and style, which is also a whole other interesting topic. Maybe we could do something on that down the road, but just on the kind of formal, informal, politeness norms and so forth that happen in online settings, and sort of adapting your everyday writing habits, like to your friends in an email, to workplace communication. That's also a really interesting topic. And there's something else kind of interesting here too to think about with students, which is online reading habits. Even a PDF document that is, PDF purposely retains the formatting of a print document. Actually, the people read differently on the screen, even with today's nice flat screens that don't curve at the edge, or some of those other issues that we knew about online reading early on. It's interesting to think about the shape of your computer screen tends to be different than the shape of a page, so you'd have to turn your most computer monitors sideways to get the shape of the page. And then you can also highlight in that discussion with students this notion of speed and reach, which we talked about before. This is from Strategies for Technical Communication, the second edition. This is kind of fun thing to do with students too, and this is just one example. But once you've narrowed it down and decided, this has to be a short message to the whole organization. It has to go out quickly, and maybe the organization has something set up with text messaging. When to choose one over the other. And in the book, we've got just this one example of when you might choose a text versus an email. So you could set up a grid like this where you talk about who's the audience, start with maybe the primary audience, people in that organization. You could add secondary audience, will this go to the news media or something? What's the purpose? To update people about a new product line we're going to be working on or something like that. How should we write that message? Style, content, and then should we use email or a text message? And that's just one example. You could substitute web, hard copy, and so on. So I think I have 4 short examples, and then we'll wrap up, and I believe after that there's time for questions. The first example is one we talked about a little bit before, which is an email that goes out to unanticipated readers. That the primary audience you had in mind was that individual coworker, but oops, it went to managers, it went to the news media, it went to the legal department. What things could the writer have considered in advance? Is it possible to control for audience when email is the delivery medium? Sometimes you get email from people, they're writing from work, it has that really long disclaimer on the bottom that says, if you were not the intended recipient of this message, please don't read it or something. I don't know if that necessarily works. That might be something a lot of students probably have never seen a disclaimer like that on an email. That would be something fun to talk to them about and interesting. Maybe in that case, depending on what the person's purpose was for sending that message, there might be other ways to deliver it that would be more secure. The second example is one that I referenced earlier also, which is a PDF version is created of a hard copy document. It's sent as an email attachment, and it gets circulated a little more widely than expected. It's not a confidential document, but it has a lot of shop talk. It has a lot of abbreviations, acronyms, technical terms meant for that original internal audience. Were there any choices available for the writer based on considering that this might go out a little more widely once it gets sent electronically? For example, could you have a section, an abstract or summary that's more accessible to people who are not technical experts? Could you have a glossary? Those kind of decisions. Another example, and this I think is really interesting to talk about, to take some print documents and think about how that might be summarized for a website that offers maybe summaries of that information, and then how someone might send out a really quick summary of that on Twitter. In technical communication, we have a nice chapter on summarizing information, and we've got a section in there where we talk about if that's summarized, then the web is a good place for a summary because you can actually link to the longer document, and that's a good example of layering or having multiple entry points for different audiences and different readers. So first would just be an interesting assignment or discussion about how to adapt that longer version for a website, and then let's all try to summarize a 200-page document in 140 characters or less, and including URL. And these days most people will take that really long URL and they'll go to like Google URL shortener and convert it into a really little link so it doesn't take up as many characters. And the last example, and then we'll wrap up, is a website with medical information for patients. And this is always a nice kind of grounded example for students because everybody's either been to the doctor or has a family member who has, so you can think about then how you would determine the information needs or what questions people would have, what's their technical background, what level of technicality or medical language is appropriate, and then how would that function as a website as opposed to being a hard copy document. And there's plenty of good examples out there and a lot of nice formats evolving. I think the Mayo Clinic site is one example that I mentioned. You could have students compare some of those. WebMD is another one that I think has more ads on it, but that becomes interesting too, to talk about the relationship of the design, and then to look really closely at the kind of language that's used when, because of it being a freely accessible website, the whole world is potentially the audience. So how did they work with different layers of technical information? So just to wrap up here before we have some questions, workplace documents are obviously, paper has not gone away, and there's still a really good role for paper documents. Like if you really want to make sure something isn't distributed that quickly, you can pass around some paper and let people review print documents. Print documents are also, I think, still considered more formal. If you look at something like a budget document from the government, when that comes out, it's bound, but this whole idea that so many things are delivered digitally really gives us an opportunity to work with students on more complicated questions about audience and purpose, and kind of learn from some of their knowledge too, as you know, they've been called digital natives. And they really have a lot of good insights, I think, into working with information in digital environments. But you know, part of what we need to stress is just that the basic rhetorical principles still apply about effective communication, and that just you don't start with the medium necessarily. You start with who you're intending to write to, what the purpose is, anticipating some unanticipated readers and purposes, and trying to still use the basic rhetorical skills or principles to create that communication. I really enjoy asking the students to find examples and learn a lot from their experiences, depending on the kind of work experience they've had. As I said, even if they've had just an internship, they often have some really interesting insights about what it was like to shift from texting with friends to using a cell phone as a workplace communication. And I think one of the things I hope to share today was just the opportunity that you might take to take an audience purpose worksheet and work with students on that to fit the different situations that might be discussed as part of some of the assignments for various document types and contexts and situations for a technical and professional writing and communication class. So I think I was supposed to go for 30 minutes. It's 9:30 my time, and I want to thank you all very much, and I think now we take questions.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Laura. I'm wondering. I like the approach to having students, analyze these texts, and especially relative to audience and purpose. And I'm wondering, what kind of texts do you have them produce? Are they, when you talk with them about digital writing? I was just kind of interested in what kind of assignments you have for producing those digital texts themselves.
Oh, so do you mean like a website or something like that? Or
yeah, are those is that sort of where your class is leading them? I was really taken with this idea, disturbing as it is, that credibility of a digital text is often adjudicated on the basis of its appearance, and so I was kind of thinking about that as you were talking about them analyzing the texts. I wondered, are they also producing texts of their own, and what's the relationship between analysis and creation?
Oh, right. Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking on campus yesterday about trust, the idea of how trust is established as a communication theory, but also with documents and anything we encounter. And it's the same with people. I think good old Aristotle said that ethos was the primary mechanism by which an argument is accepted or not. In other words, it's the most powerful of the appeal, so the character and credibility of the speaker, or in this case, the character and credibility of the document, often seems to come through in the look of it first. So I think there's a really powerful relationship between having students critique things and then applying what they found to their own assignments. So one example would be, I really like to work a lot with like medical information because I think it's something everybody can relate to. So having students look at some websites related to maybe some really common kind of applications like aspirin or something is something everybody knows, and then thinking about how you would take that information and write. We might construct a scenario for writing a memo to a physician about a change in a prescription or something, or how to use it, versus how to write, like if you look at a website for like a popular brand of aspirin, you know, how to write those chunks of text that would be accessible to everyday readers. So that would be like, then you would really start talking about the kind of language you could use, even the length of the sentences that can happen in a web-based reading. So it's kind of, I enjoy taking one assignment and then trying to sort of split it up into various kinds of writing projects so that we're thinking about that layered effect. So you might have, or you might have something else where the primary role is to write a report. I think for most technical writing classes there's a report or a big proposal or feasibility study due at the end, but then let's take a step from that and say, well, what would happen if we had to create a short summary for that on a website and maybe send out a little press release on Twitter or something, or something like that. As far as web design goes, I think that's pretty hard to teach in a class where you have a whole lot of other assignments due, but one of the approaches we've taken to that in the books is just to give rhetorical principles or some good guiding principles for overall for web design, and then it kind of depends on whether you're going to take your class more in that direction or or not. You can certainly sketch out web pages and look for really good examples of web pages. So,
it's interesting while you were talking about having students kind of like thinking about that. The layered effect and the repurposing or refashioning of text. I was thinking about what you said earlier about the importance of tone and topic, and that would be a good topic for a presentation in the future. But tone is so much a part of some of those changes that you could make to a text as well. So I can see where that would come into your thinking.
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot of discussion now about the level of informality that seems to either be inspired by using digital tools or what. I mean, that's a whole discussion about how much do you blame the technology versus just our own behavior. That's a whole different topic, really. But I mean, it does seem that if you look at like the past 25 years worth of research on computer-mediated communication and you can see that there is this sort of shift toward more informal kinds of writing. And of course with texting, it doesn't matter how you spell, it's speed that really matters, getting things done as quickly as possible. And some of that, flowing back over into settings that have traditionally been considered more formal. And, when is that appropriate and when is that not? And that's a really great, that's why I said that could be sort of a whole interesting follow-up discussion, because that becomes a really nice place to engage students in where they're already writing anyway a lot in their day-to-day lives, and then talk about how would you construct that same kind of message if you were writing to your professor or you're writing to your manager. I mean, we already know they write to their professor in pretty informal ways anyway, but just to talk about that. The difference in tone, style, and when you make those shifts and how you make those shifts. And just simple things like the fact that email, the structure of email was modeled around the memo. You know, it has to,
Right.
from, subject, date, and yet, you know, we kind of think that if it's a formal situation, you should say dear so-and-so or have a salutation, which typically memos didn't use salutations, so you know, just that kind of a discussion when the medium is sort of a crossover between a few different things, you know, what's appropriate in what settings. And that's why I kept coming back to sort of basic rhetorical principles, because in the end, those are the things we have to really ask ourselves. Is that appropriate for this setting, for this audience, and for whatever my goal might be? We've got an example in the books of a informal email, sort of inappropriate tone, and then kind of a revision of it. So that's something people can look at.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it as a, you know, as having come from the memo, and it is such an odd hybrid. The way, you know, some people will use it like a memo to convey information, and other people, you know, seem to think of it like a substitute for the telephone, where it's conversational, and you can see those two very different communication styles kind of unfolding in that same genre, which is interesting to observe. So.
Or sometimes it becomes, the email becomes the cover memo to the memo, right? So you get the email that says, you know, please see attached memo from Vice President so-and-so, and then there's this nice PDF on letterhead attached. And, you know, that's an interesting conversation point too. You know, what, if you go back to audience and purpose, what's the reason for choosing that electronic version of something, hard copy with the logo and the letterhead on it and attaching? I mean, it's obviously a different level of formality. It has more durability in a certain way. Like a print document would be a little more durable because you probably download that PDF. Some people might print it out, absurd as that sort of seems, but that people might actually print it out. You know, they might pin it up on a bulletin board or something so they can see whatever's in there. So, you know, that goes back to that question of audience and purpose, and what would be the reason for writing the memo that way versus just sticking the text of it into an email message.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about too. I was just thinking of an email conversation I had with a student earlier this week, where the student wants to have everything, even from an online class. They're like, well, can you just send me can you just send it to me as an attachment? And I'm thinking, well, it's an online class, so I didn't really have the expectation that students would want, you know, everything in hard copy, but, you know, and certainly not, you know, a digital native, which this student is a dual credit student, so maybe, you know, 18 years old. So it was really kind of surprising to me, and I've been sort of puzzling over why the student would want that, but I think it has to do with you know, probably the student's study practice and how they want to use the document, maybe even as a reminder to do the work from the class by putting it on the desk. And, you know, you started the presentation talking about all the talk there used to be of going paperless and how we've kind of whittled down our papers, but I'm sitting here with 3 different piles of papers, as well as, you know, my computer and my 2 monitors, and they do all seem to have different almost different cognitive purposes.
Right. Well, you know, I think that's why people print. Is it's still true that we read more slowly with print documents, and maybe even absorb more than we do on the screen. I mean, the evolution of these e-readers, though, is changing that a lot, because you can control for the fonts and the size of the page, and the lighting is different on them, and they're actually the shape of a page. So that's kind of changing. That's changing that a lot. But I know it's interesting. I'm teaching a seminar this semester, and all the readings are either PDF or links to articles. And we come to class, and you know, a lot of students have printed them out and highlighted them. I mean, with the physical highlighter. And this is a seminar in, you know, Internet Studies, Theory, and Research. So it's kind of interesting. You know, they don't need batteries. You don't need to sit near a plug.
Right.
And there is that cognitive, that relationship to reading speed. So in a way, that's an interesting tweak also to audience and purpose, which is, there are times where you want someone to read something very quickly, but there might be times where you want them to read it in a more studious kind of way, and then it's probably better to veer towards something that's designed to be printed.
Yeah, that's it. That actually connects to the previous session where the presenter was talking about getting students to read complicated texts and the way the relationship to a complex text differs, and the way the approach to it should differ. So
right.
That's interesting. Well, I think we have a lot to talk about, Laura, in future conferences. So maybe we'll kind of resurrect the question of tone and topic or something else at a future conference. I've really enjoyed having you today. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.